Welcome to the first lecture for Phil 110 Intro to Philosophy. This is the first lecture with content, and we're going to look at arguments today. We're going to explain what philosophers mean by arguments and contrast it with what the contemporary culture kind of usually thinks when they think of the term argument. And then we're going to look at a very influential historical example of an argument towards the end of this lecture, found in the Plato one of the Plato readings that I've assigned. First, it's helpful to explain what an argument is not.
The truth. And number two, when you're caught committing a crime, as this man was,
he was drunk in public twice.
Hold it.
And one time he was a drunk driver with no victims.
He should have been deported the first time, and he was not. And the reason he wasn't deported,
because he didn't commit a felony.
It doesn't make any difference.
And he didn't commit a misdemeanor. He didn't commit a misdemeanor having to do with moral turpitude either.
So let me get this straight.
Everyone followed the law. You ever heard an apology from the governor to the mayor down?
No, they didn't. Now, I just want to get this straight. You, Geraldo Rivera, with teenage daughters, are telling me that you are okay with somebody sneaking into the country, becoming drunk, get convicted of a DUI, and staying here. You're all right with that.
My nightmare is my daughter's having anything to do with a drunk. Let me finish my answer. My nightmare is my daughter's having anything to do with a person driving drunk. That's my nightmare. Okay. It could be a Jewish drunk. It could be a Polish drunk. It could be an Irish drunk. It could be an Italian drunk.
American
what the hell difference does it make?
It makes plenty of difference.
It does not.
He doesn't have a right to be here.
He didn't commit a felony.
He doesn't have a right to be in this country.
What? But that has nothing to do with the fact that he was a drunk.
He should have been deported. He should have been deported, and this mayor and the police chief didn't deport him.
Listen, do you know how many people we have in jail? How many of them are illegal aliens? Illegal aliens commit crimes at a lower rate than citizens do.
This guy shouldn't have been here.
Cool your jets. That has nothing to do with illegal aliens. It has to do with drunk driving. Don't obscure a tragedy to make a cheap political point.
I'm the father.
It's a cheap political point.
No, it isn't.
And you know
this is justice.
This has nothing to do with that poor old lady mayor.
You
want nothing to do with that mayor.
You want anarchy.
No,
you want open border anarchy.
What I want is fairness. We have lured these people. We have lured these people.
This is the law.
We have lured these people.
So, when we're talking about arguments in Intro to Philosophy of Phil 110, as philosophers, we do not mean what Bill O'Reilly and Geraldo Rivera were just doing. Although that is entertaining, and there may have been implicit in that quote conversation, which is really just a shouting match, some arguments. That overall thing, though, isn't what we're going to be discussing, and it's not what I'm going to be teaching you how to do. So, importantly, when we're talking about philosophical arguments, then, we're talking about kind of disputes between reasonable people. And the aim of disputes between reasonable people is not the following. It's not to just win. It's not to force your opponent into submission. It is not to manipulate your opponent's emotions or the audience's emotions, if there is an audience. It's not to annoy your opponent. It's not even to get even though that can feel pretty good sometimes. Instead, the aim of disputes between reasonable people is to arrive at the truth. So, arrive at the truth is italicized. That's the 21st century way of saying this is important. I think it's also bolded. So, pay attention to that. The aim of disputes between reasonable people is to arrive at truth. That should be your primary concern. And sometimes that means that your opponent or your conversation partner might be right and you might be wrong. But if your aim is to arrive at the truth, then that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because then you've learned something. It isn't about winning. It's about, coming to have true beliefs. And the truth shall set you free! I apologize. That recent movie clip is about as cliche as it gets. I guarantee you in every other intro to philosophy class in this country right now, where the professors or instructors know something about how to use modern technology, they've probably shown that clip, or a similar clip. Perhaps there's also one with Tom Cruise, I think, in the movie A Few Good Men, I believe. So again, I apologize. However, you'll find no Monty Python clips in, well, this lecture at least, I think. There's a few other clips that have been overused by philosophy instructors. So anyways, back to the important stuff. Let's offer a more precise definition of a philosophical argument. So pay attention to this. This might show up in a quiz. An argument is a series of sentences or propositions, one of which is offered as the claim to be supported and is called the conclusion. the rest of which are offered in support of the conclusion, and they're called premises. So I've given an example of an argument below, and we'll look at some real arguments soon, but it's just basically if you were going to kind of formally present an argument, if you were going to reconstruct an argument that you perhaps read in an editorial somewhere, this is the structure it would take. However, when you read editorials or arguments that aren't philosophically precise, sometimes the conclusion will be at the beginning, and then the supporting reasons, the premises they'll follow the conclusion. But it's generally, this is how we represent them, though, as philosophers. So, important, though, we're not merely interested in the truth of the premises, although this will be a feature of a good argument. But we're also interested in the connection between the premises and the conclusion. So you make a claim, and then you give supporting reasons for that claim. Well, those reasons that you give in support of your claim should actually support that claim. And if they don't support that claim, then you're not giving a good argument. So here's an example of a bad argument. The premise: 2 plus 2 equals 4. Conclusion: so all dogs are mammals. So this argument concludes that all dogs are mammals from the premise that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now, what's wrong with this argument? Both the premise and the conclusion are true. So it can't be that there's a false premise or a false conclusion. Well, again, it's that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise. Or to state it differently, the premise does not entail the conclusion. The problem then lies with the argument because there isn't the right kind of connection between the premise and the conclusion, as we were discussing. So when we say that there isn't the right connection between a premise and conclusion, what philosophers mean is that the argument is not logically valid, and we'll have more to say about that. So logic is a discipline within philosophy, although computer science and mathematics people tend to also study logic, but it's a philosophical discipline, and it's a discipline by which we study arguments. We evaluate arguments, good and bad arguments, and this is kind of what this lesson's about. This is baby logic, intro to logic. So, and it's been around for a very long time. The first real rigorous treatise on logic, or treatises plural, was written by Aristotle, about 2300 BC. He wrote 4 books, I want to say. One was called The Categories. The second book was called On Interpretation. The third was called Prior Analytics, and the fourth was called Posterior Analytics. Don't worry, this won't show up on the quiz. This is free historical knowledge. This is a philosophy class, but you're getting free history as well. So your parents' hard-earned money is being put to good use. All right. So recall, we're not interested merely in the truth of the premises, the premise in which the argument is. Because recall, the argument I just gave a couple slides back has a true premise. It's true that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Instead, we're interested, as I mentioned, in the connection between the premises and the conclusion. And as truth is the ultimate goal, good arguments are restricted to those which have the potential to preserve the truth from the premises to the conclusion. So if the premises are true in a good argument, then the conclusion must also be true. And to kind of help you get a better understanding of that last point I just made, we're going to look at deductive arguments today. So there's another type of argument called inductive, but we're not going to spend too much time looking at it this semester. Most of the arguments that we're going to be looking at in this course are going to be deductive. So, deductive reasoning is a type of reasoning that does not merely render the conclusion probable or likely. Instead, deductive reasoning is such that the premises are intended to provide conclusive reasons for why a particular claim is true. Now here's an aside. That TV series Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch is incredibly popular right now, and it's a really good show. Although, to be honest, I wasn't as big of a fan as the 3rd season, but the 1st season was awesome. Anyways, Sherlock uses the term deduction for all sorts of reasoning that he does, and he's a very good reasoner, which makes him a brilliant detective. But he uses deductive in a very broad sense, whereas in this class, and most philosophers throughout all of time and space use it in a much more narrow sense. In fact, we'd say that Sherlock misuses the term deduction. So shame on him. Am I saying that most philosophers are smarter than Sherlock? Probably. I'm joking. Different types of intelligence. But we're all fans of that show, though. But just to be clear, though, for those of you that are Sherlock fans, don't assume that he's using the term deductive correctly. All right. So deductive reasoning, then, is such that the premises are intended to provide conclusive reasons for why a particular claim is true. Well, let's go back real quick. This is to be contrasted real quickly with what philosophers call inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning makes a conclusion probable, but it doesn't make it, certain. Okay. So here's an example, real quick, of an inductive argument. The past 4 swans I have seen were white. Although there aren't many swans around here. The past 4 cranes I've seen at the Celery Bog Marsh were gray. Therefore, probably the next crane I see will also be gray. That's an inductive argument. And it doesn't mean that it's certain that the next crane I see will be gray. Instead, it just means that it's pretty likely. It's probable. Okay. Deductive, though, would mean it's certain. So, a deductive argument, then, a good one, will have 3 features, which I'm going to explain in turn. Validity, soundness, and convincingness. We've talked some about validity, so let's say a little bit more. A valid deductive argument is one such that the premises and conclusions are related in a way that guarantees the truth of the conclusion, given the truth of the premises. So again, in a valid deductive argument, the premises are related to the conclusion in such a way that the conclusion is guaranteed to be true if the premises are true. Okay? Certain. All right? Beware, though. There are valid deductive arguments that have false premises. And this is because validity concerns the form of the argument and guarantees only what would be the case if the premises were true. A valid argument with true premises, then, is what philosophers call a sound argument, which we'll look at next. But first, we need to look at validity. So, again, valid deductive arguments can have false premises. Validity is not a feature of the truth. Validity is not necessarily concerned with the content of an argument, then. It's concerned with the structure or form of the argument. By the way, I picked that picture for a reason. Guess why I put that picture in there? It's relevant to this slide. All right. I bet you won't figure it out. All right. So here's 2 arguments. We'll look at argument 1 first. The argument runs as follows. If Davis is a unicorn, then Davis is a kitten. Davis is a unicorn, so Davis is a kitten. Argument 2. If Davis is a human, then Davis is a mammal. Davis is a human, so Davis is a man. All right. I want to note that validity is a logical feature of arguments, irrespective of the psychological fact that none of us would ever be convinced of the conclusion. So, we're going to ask, are either of these arguments valid, even if and these arguments, again, can be valid even if the premises are true. And validity, again, is a logical feature of arguments. It's not a psychological fact about us. Whether or not an argument is valid has nothing to do with our psychological makeup whatsoever. In other words, logical validity is not emotional validation.
Frank, this is a safe place. It's a place where we can feel free sharing our feelings. Think of my office as a nest in a tree of trust and understanding. We can say anything here.
Just to clarify, maybe your emotions are valid, but occasionally you can give arguments that are not logically valid. Your significant other should probably validate your emotions to have a healthy relationship with you, as should your friends and family. But in a philosophy class, if you give a logically invalid argument, it will probably be pointed out to you. And you want that. You want to give good, logically valid arguments. So just keep those 2 concepts separate. Okay. So argument 2 is a good argument. Here's argument 2. Again. If Davis is a human, then Davis is a mammal. Davis is a human, so Davis is a mammal. It's valid. the conclusion is appropriately related to the premises, and this is captured in the structure or form of the argument. But it's also what philosophers call sound. A sound argument is an argument that is valid and has true premises, and argument 2 has true premises. I am a human. I am a mammal. And if something is a human, then something is a mammal. But notice, argument 2 has the same structure or form as argument 1. And I've replaced the content of the argument with variables to show you the structure. So the structure is if P then Q, P so Q. And look at both arguments. If P, Davis is a unicorn, then Q, Davis is a kitten. P, Davis is a unicorn, so Q, Davis is a kitten. If Davis is human, P, then Davis is a mammal. Q, Davis is human. P, so Davis is a mammal. Q. Same structure. So if both arguments have the same structure, and the second argument is valid, what does that mean? It means, ta-da, that the first argument is valid as well, even though it has false premises. So again, it's very important to remember that in a valid argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. But, so it is impossible for the premises to be true in a valid argument and the conclusion be false. But it's also important to remember that validity concerns the form or structure of the argument, not the content. So a valid argument can have false premises. But if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Let's see if I can make my voice go a little bit more higher pitched, because this point's really important. A valid argument can have false premises. But if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. My advisor is Jan Cover, and his voice can go a few octaves higher when he's excited. But I hope I've made my point clear. So, here's an example of a form. We're talking about the form of an argument. Here's like a health form you'd fill out at the push center. I don't know, suppose you get mono because you've been playing the makeout game. Oh wait, that's a high school thing. You guys are college students. You don't do that. So every patient at the doctor's office fills out the same form, all right? Asks the same questions. Everyone has to tell you, the nurse, whether you smoke or not, whether you drink or not, whether you have high cholesterol, whether you... Okay, but people give different answers to these questions. So they all have the same form, but then there's different content in the form based on the patient. Some patients have allergies. Some smoke. Some drink. Some female patients are pregnant. And so on, etc. So same form, different content. Well, it's the same with logic. Different arguments can have the same form, but have different content. And those first two arguments you looked at had the same form, but they had different content. So validity doesn't concern the content, it concerns the form of an argument. If one argument has a valid form, then another argument has the same form but different content will still be valid. Okay, so we've been talking about validity, now let's talk about invalidity. Some arguments are invalid. In fact, many are. And your goal is to learn how to sniff them out, and so that you can recognize them in others and not give invalid arguments yourself. So invalid arguments have a structure or form such that it will be possible for the premises to be true and yet the conclusion be false. So again, invalid arguments. What makes an argument invalid is not the content but the form. And an invalid argument has a form such that it's possible for there to be true premises but a false conclusion. So here's an example of an invalid argument that has, well actually we'll start out with an argument that has true premises and a true conclusion. This argument's invalid. Now the question is why? So, if Davis is a snake, then Davis is a reptile. Davis is not a snake, so Davis is not a reptile. Premise 1 is true. Anything that's a snake is a reptile. Premise 2 is also true. I am a human being, therefore I am not a snake. And the conclusion is also true. I am not a reptile. Okay, even though my significant other sometimes thinks I am because of my cold, emotionless, Sherlockian nature. I'm joking. I have feelings. So, why is 4 invalid then? Well, it's invalid because it has a form in which we could construct a counterexample that would have true premises but a false conclusion. So that particular argument form is such that you can have true premises and a false conclusion, even though in the first example has a true conclusion. So here's the form. If P then Q, not P, so not Q. So we just replace the content with variables and then we get the form. It's like algebra. All right. Here's then a counterexample with the exact same form. If Davis is a unicorn, then Davis is a mammal. Davis is not a unicorn, so Davis is not a mammal. So here's the deal. Both premises in this argument are true, but the conclusion is false. I'm just going to go on a limb and think that if there were such things as unicorns, they are probably mammals. I think that's the best candidate. I don't think they're fish. I don't think they're reptiles. I don't think they're single-celled organisms or bacteria. I'm pretty sure they're mammals. All right. Premise 2. Davis is not a unicorn. Okay, most of you have not met me in person, but I can assure you I am a human being. I am not a white equine creature with a horn sticking out of my skull that only virgins can tame and ride. I am a human being with 2 legs, no horns, and I have human parents. Okay, so this has the same form as that previous argument, but has true premises and a false conclusion. So we have a counterexample. Well, if you have an argument form such that you can have true premises but a false conclusion, then you have an invalid argument form. It does not preserve truth from premises to conclusion. Whereas in a valid argument form, truth is preserved. True premises, then you get a true conclusion. It's a feature of arguments called truth preservation. So we're going to take a look at, in this lecture then, at some valid argument forms. And we'll just go through them. If you really want to get a better grip on this stuff, then I'd suggest you take critical thinking or logic. So you look at that way more in depth than we'll have time to this semester. But in this semester, we'll just kind of do a brief bird's eye overview of this stuff. So, but it's worth going through some valid argument forms. So valid argument form, they generally have Latin names, by the way. So the first one is modus ponens. And we've seen this form already. If P then Q, P, so Q. That's the form. And then here's an example. If Davis hates babies, then Davis hates baby chickens. Davis hates babies, so Davis hates baby chickens. That would be an example. Now the question is this argument sound? It's valid, but to be sound, it would have to have true premises. It's not sound. I think babies are adorable. That's my friend's baby chicken that on a farm he just bought. Okay. Another valid argument form. Modus tollens. If P, then Q, not Q, so not P. So this is similar to modus ponens. The first premise has the same structure. If P, then Q. If P, then Q. But then notice the second premise, not Q. So the second premise in modus tollens denies what's on the right hand of the first premise. Not Q, denies Q. And then you conclude not P. So you deny that, then you conclude the denial of that. This is called the consequent, and this is called the antecedent. So in a modus tollens, you deny the consequent, and then you get to conclude with the denial of the antecedent. Whereas in a modus ponens, you affirm the antecedent, and then you get to conclude with the affirmation of the consequent. All right. Here's an example of a modus tollens. If Davis has magical powers, then Davis can tame unicorns. Premise 2. It is not the case that Davis can tame unicorns. Conclusion. So, it is not the case that Davis has magical powers. Okay, so see the structure? Davis has magical powers could be P. Davis can tame unicorns is Q. If P, then Q. Not Q, so not P. Now, this looks similar to a bad invalid argument we just gave a few slides back. What's the difference? Here's the invalid argument. If P, then Q. Not P, so not Q. But here's the valid argument. If P, then Q. Not Q, so not P. What makes this valid, but the other one invalid? Well, I'll tell you. This is invalid because this doesn't deny Q, it denies P. And then it concludes with a denial of Q from the denial of P. But you can't do that. Why? Because remember, there's counterexamples of that argument form. For example, this argument right here. All right. Okay, so question. Is this argument sound? No, it is not. All right. Another valid argument form is what's called disjunctive syllogism. And it has this structure: either P or Q, premise 1, premise 2, not P, and then premise, and then the conclusion. So, Q. So, you have two things, A or B. If you deny one, you can affirm the other. So here's an example. Either Davis loves small kittens, or Davis wishes a wizard would turn all small kittens into zombies. Davis does not love small kittens, so Davis wishes a wizard would turn all small kittens into zombies. What a horrible argument. I swear, I'm not a horrible person. But a more realistic example would be either it's raining or it's not raining. It's actually a better, how about this? Either it's raining or it's sunny outside. It's not raining, so it's sunny outside. That would be an example. That's something you do all the time. You think, either it's raining and I need to grab my umbrella, or it's sunny outside and I don't need to grab my umbrella. It's not raining, therefore it's sunny outside and I don't need to grab my umbrella. All right. So, oh, that's cute. It's a kitten zombie. All right, hypothetical syllogism. If P then Q, it has this form. If P then Q, if Q then R, so if P then R. So see this connection? P and R. You get to conclude with this connection between P and R. And the link is Q. And you link it by these first two premises. If P then Q, if Q then R, then if P then R. So if Davis hates small organisms, then Davis hates small animals. If Davis hates small animals, then Davis hates kittens. So if Davis hates small organisms, then Davis hates kittens. You can see that linked together. Here's a much nicer example. And by the way, I think small organisms are just absolutely adorable. I don't know what I was thinking when I used these examples, but I made these slides a while ago. And I apologize. I really do. So, if it's raining, then I need to grab my rain jacket. If I need to grab my rain jacket, then I should probably also grab my umbrella. It's raining, so I should grab my umbrella. Here's another example. If it's sunny outside, then it's hot. If it's hot, then I need to roll down the windows of my car. It's sunny outside, so I need to roll down the windows of my car. If there are no parking spots, then I need to take the bus. If I need to take the bus, then I need to grab some change. There are no parking spots, so I need to grab some change. And so on, etc. There's literally an infinite number of possible examples of any of these argument forms that we look at. That's how awesome reality is. It just supplies us with infinite numbers of examples. You can't count them. For every number you count, there will be one more. Here's another valid argument form. Reductio ad absurdum. Suppose, so this argument takes this form. You suppose something, but then when you suppose it, so you take something, some claim, and you assume that it's true for the sake of argument. But then, by assuming that it's true, you derive a contradiction. So, you suppose P is true, or P is some claim, and then you conclude Q, but also not Q. That's a contradiction. Q can't be true and not Q also be true at the same time. That's stupid. Contradictions are horrible. Philosophers don't like contradictions. Alright, so any claim that leads to contradictions then is absurd. And we call it the reduction to absurdity. And we're going to look at an example right now from Plato. So the Plato reading I gave you. So the dialogues are written by Plato, but it's about the philosopher Socrates. Plato was Socrates' student. And then, actually, Plato in turn taught Aristotle. So, they used to teach this stuff in high school, but I guarantee you did not learn this in high school. I used to not have to explain this stuff. Alright, so Plato lived a long time ago, 424 BC to 348 BC. And he was in Athens, Greece. He was a Greek philosopher, and he founded the academy. It was like one of the first institutions of higher learning. So there's Plato was one of the most important philosophers of all time, if not the most important. In fact, there was a really important philosopher in the 20th century, Whitehead, who had this quote. He says, "The safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it basically consists in a series of footnotes to Plato." So everything we do kind of traces back to Plato. All right, so Socrates, though, was Plato's teacher. Socrates never wrote anything. He just walked around Athens and would just pick people's brains and philosophize all day long. And Plato hung around him a lot and remembered a lot and wrote down a lot of what kind of wrote down all these interactions. So we're going to look at one such interaction. This is in the Apology. So Plato's teacher, Socrates, like I said, is probably one of the most famous philosophers of all time. You may have heard of the Socratic method. Maybe not. So in this dialogue that I assigned for you, the Apology, Socrates is facing a court that has accused Socrates of a number of crimes. And Socrates has to give a defense before the jury, before being given a verdict, which will eventually, he'll actually get a guilty verdict and gets the death penalty for it. So the specific accusations are that Socrates doesn't believe in the gods, and therefore he's an atheist, which was a crime in Athens during that time. And he is corrupting the youth with these newfound spiritual teachings. So those are the charges, all right? And it's Socrates' job to face the jury and to defend himself against those charges. And Socrates is a philosopher, and he's going to do a good job. So Socrates responds to Meletus by charging that Meletus' charge results in a contradiction. So what Socrates will give is a reductio ad absurdum style argument. He'll take Meletus' claims and then derive a contradiction from those claims. And then by doing that, he can prove his innocence. So here are the two charges. One, Socrates is an atheist. And two, Socrates is teaching the youth to believe in other new spiritual things. So Socrates first responds that there can only be spiritual things if there are spirits. That seems pretty obviously true. There can only be physical things if there are, physical objects, I guess. There can only be spiritual things if there are spirits. That doesn't seem like it needs any defense. All right. But second, well, here's the deal. Spirits are either gods or they're children of the gods. That must have been a common Athenian belief at the time. If there are spirits, they either are gods or children of the gods. Well, if spirits are gods, then if Socrates believes in spiritual things, Socrates must believe in gods. Hey, look, hypothetical syllogism. If something is a spirit, then if X is a spirit, then X is a god. If X believes in spirits, so X believes in gods. I'll let you work that out. It's a hypothetical syllogism structure right there, but I've already taught you that, so it's maybe if you have some free time, think it through. Maybe on the discussion boards. Okay. Second, if spirits are children of gods, then once again there must be gods that the spirits are children of. So, again, Socrates believes in gods, and I suspect that that same hypothetical syllogism structure is implicit in that final bullet point as well. All right, so that's Socrates' first response. So, in this instance, Socrates has caught Meletus in a contradiction. On the one hand, Meletus charges Socrates with being an atheist. And I misspelled atheist. My bad. Shame on spell check for not catching that. On the other hand, Meletus' charge is committed to Socrates believing in gods. But one cannot believe that there are no gods, and at the same time believe that there are gods. That's a contradiction. So, that's Socrates' reductio. Alright, here's another valid argument form. This is called a dilemma. And it starts like this. Either P or Q, and then if P then not R. If Q then not R, so not R. So you have two options, P or Q, and both options entail the same thing. They both entail not R. Then you can conclude not R from P or Q. Okay? Here's a bad example. Either only philosophers can see unicorns, or anyone can see unicorns. If only philosophers can see unicorns, then someone can see unicorns. If anyone can see unicorns, then someone can see unicorns. So someone can see unicorns. Here's a better example. Either it's raining, and I need to, or it's snowing. If it's raining, then I need to wear a jacket. If it's snowing, then I need to wear a jacket. So, I need to wear a jacket. Here's another one. Either there are no parking spaces available today, or my car is broken. If there are no parking spaces available today, then I need to take the bus. If my car is broken, then I need to take the bus. So I need to take the bus. You think of another one. All right, another valid argument form. So let's go back to Socrates. Remember I said, so Socrates' overall argument, the overall structure is just reductio ad absurdum, but embedded within it is a dilemma. So an argument that takes a form a lot like this. All right, here's how I've reconstructed it. Socrates believes in spiritual things. If one believes in spiritual things, then one believes in spirits. Spirits are either gods or children of gods. If spirits are gods, then Socrates believes in gods. If spiritual children are gods, then Socrates believes in gods. And here's the argument. If one believes that there are children of gods, then one believes that there are gods. So, Socrates believes in gods. So, you have an either or, either P or Q, but both entail that Socrates believes in gods, so you conclude that Socrates believes in gods. That's the dilemma. So, the dilemma kind of starts with premise 3. And it takes a slightly different structure, but I hope you can see this. So, all right. Yet, there's another dilemma in the same argument in the Apology, though. Or a similar argument, actually, I apologize. And this is why I picked this dialogue. It's just rich with good examples. And by the way, this is a real thing that happened. Socrates really was a philosopher who was really put to death. And that dude had some courage, because he could have denied the charges, or he could have approached it a different way, but he owned up to it and gladly accepted the penalty. He's like, bring it on. All right. So yeah, the first philosopher was killed by the public. We haven't had a good track record, I guess. But Socrates had courage. This is an exciting dialogue, basically. This is like a courtroom drama going on right now. With really devastating consequences. Okay, so Meletus accuses Socrates of corrupting the young. Socrates responds by arguing, and this is a complicated argument, but this is how I've reconstructed it. A man is harmed, premise 1, by associating with wicked people, and man is benefited by associating with good people. Premise 2, if Socrates corrupts the young, then Socrates will end up associating with wicked people. If Socrates associates with wicked people, then Socrates will be harmed. So, Socrates either corrupts the young or doesn't corrupt the young. If Socrates corrupts the young, Socrates either corrupts the young willingly or unwillingly. No one is willingly harmed. So Socrates does not corrupt the young willingly. So either Socrates corrupts the young unwillingly, or Socrates does not corrupt the young. If Socrates corrupts the young unwillingly, then Meletus is lying. If Socrates does not corrupt the young, then Meletus is lying. So, Meletus is lying. By the way, these PowerPoint slides will be available in the course notes folder for this week on Blackboard. So if I'm moving too quickly for it, by all means, go look over my slides and take a little bit more time. All right. Now, we're going to look at 2 more features of arguments, and then we're going to wrap up this lesson. And I realized it was a long lesson. It's an important one. And the nice thing about online distance learning is that in these YouTube videos is that there's a pause button. So you can always pause it and come back later. Because this is a lot of information for your brains to absorb, especially if you've never been exposed to any of this before. I remember the first time I was exposed to it, I was overwhelmed. All right, so recall that there are 3 good-making features of arguments: validity, soundness, and convincingness. And remember the previous dilemma? The dilemma would be valid, but something seems wrong with it, for unicorns do not exist. Let's find that dilemma. Oh my gosh, you can see my computer screen. Alright. Let's find that dilemma. Nope. Nope. Wait. No. Ah, here we go. Okay, so look at this argument form. This is a valid argument form, but it has false premises, okay? Something seems wrong with it. Then, well, soundness will concern the false premises part of it. So, the dilemma is valid, but something's wrong, because unicorns don't exist. So, argument form 2 also is valid, but there's something wrong with it as well. The difference is not the form of the argument, but the content. The premises of the unicorn argument are false, while the premises in argument 2 are true. Man, argument 2 is like way back there. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. No, wait, almost there. Oh, no. Got it! Here's an argument with true premises. I am a human, and all humans are mammals. So I am a mammal. All right. I'm not doing that again. All right. So while we want arguments to be valid, we also want them to have true premises. This feature, a valid argument that having true premises, is what philosophers call soundness. So the definition of a sound argument then is an argument that is valid and has true premises. So that's actually all there is to it. There's not much else to say in this lecture about soundness. Once you can recognize a valid argument, then you just have to ask, are the premises true? And throughout the semester, we'll be looking at different ways to assess whether or not a premise is true. But for this lecture, that's all you need to know about soundness. A sound argument is an argument that is valid and has true premises. There's a third quality of good arguments called convincingness. So recall, arguments are meant to make progress in a disagreement. They do this, when done well, by genuinely showing you something that you hadn't previously seen. Alright? So many sound arguments, that is, arguments that are valid and have true premises, actually fail to show you something you hadn't previously seen. They fail to convince. Here's an example of one. Premise 1, dogs are mammals, and Davis likes Black Flag. Conclusion, so dogs are mammals. Well, the premise of this argument is true. I like the band Black Flag, dogs are mammals. The argument's also valid. It's the form is A and B, so A. And that's a valid argument form. You can conclude from A and B, A. You could also conclude from A and B, B. Okay? But suppose I was debating a biologist and trying to, or suppose you are a biologist debating someone that doesn't know much about biology, and you're trying to convince them that dogs are mammals. This argument would not be convincing, for I have not started with premises that you already agreed and shown then by argument that dogs are mammals. So, to be a good deductive argument then, it should not only be sound, but it should also be convincing. Alright? Alright, finally, just as there are good ways of reasoning, there's also bad ways of reasoning. Bad arguments then are called fallacies or fallacious. We've already looked at a few fallacies when we looked at invalid arguments. So most fallacies affect one of the three features of good arguments that we've looked at. So an argument that is fallacious will affect the validity of it or the convincingness of it, for example. All right. So here's an example of a fallacy that I see all the time in editorials. And you've probably made this fallacy yourself, and shame on you. And it's called affirming the consequent. And it takes this form. If P then Q, Q, so P. So this is like modus tollens and modus ponens. It has that premise, if P then Q, that structure. But then it affirms in the premise Q, the consequent. And then you conclude P. Why can't we do that? Well, here's an example first off. If Davis's aunt is a hoarder, then Davis's aunt's house smells. Premise 2. Davis's aunt's house smells. So, Davis's aunt is a hoarder. Why is this argument invalid? It's invalid because it's possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. For example, it could be true that my aunt's house smells, but that she's not a hoarder. Instead, she could have been on vacation and the rodent died in the AC unit, for example. So it's possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false, given this argument form. So this is a fallacy. It's invalid. Another one is very similar. It's called denying the antecedent. And it takes this form of P then Q, not P, so not Q. Why is this invalid? Well, notice again the structure. It has that conditional first premise, if P then Q. But then what it starts out by doing is by denying the antecedent, P, and then you conclude by denying Q, the consequent. We've seen this before in this lecture. And I've already explained why it's invalid, but it's worth stating again. So here's an example. If Betty White has kissed Davis, then at least one celebrity woman has kissed Davis. Betty White has not kissed Davis, So it is not the case that at least one celebrity woman has kissed Davis. Why is this argument invalid? Again, it's invalid because it is possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. Even if Betty White has not kissed Davis, another celebrity woman, such as Barbara Bush, may have kissed Davis. So, another fallacy, it's called equivocation. Again, this happens a lot. This fallacy occurs when an expression appearing in more than one premise shifts its meaning mid-argument. So when you say that you're equivocating, that's what it means. You're using the same term even though it means different things. Here's an example. All reds are communists. Mars is a red planet. So Mars is a communist planet. When we say Mars is a red planet, we're referring to a color. But when we say all reds are communists, we're referring to a political position. So this argument is fallacious. It equivocates on the term red. So it allegedly takes this form. All F's are G's. S is an F, so S is a G. But really, the argument takes this form. All F's are G's. S is an H, so S is a G. But you can't conclude that S is a G from these two premises. There's no connection between S and G given here. You have a connection between F and G, and you have a connection between S and H. So that's fallacious. It's an equivocation. Another one is false dilemma. This is a fallacy that affects not the validity of an argument. Instead, it affects the soundness of an argument. So false dilemma could be a valid argument, but the premise, the dilemma in the first premise would be false. Here's an example. Either Bieber is the greatest musician to have ever lived, or Bieber is the worst musician to have ever lived. Well, this is not sound because it could be the case that he's the second or third or fourth or fifth worst or best musician of all time. Here's another example. Well, actually, who's the worst? This guy. Just kidding. All right. He's a great musician. All right. So another example of a false dilemma. Either it's raining outside or it's snowing outside. It's not raining outside, so it's snowing outside. Well, it could be sunny outside. Or it could just be cloudy outside. Or it could be, I don't know, hailing outside. So that's not the only two options out there, all right? Either a Republican or a Democrat will win. Well, what about libertarians or Greens? Well, you can think of examples. This is pretty straightforward. All right, another example of a fallacy which affects the third good-making feature in our argument, convincingness, is called begging the question. You've probably heard this phrase used a bunch. You probably misused it, though. This is where an arguer presupposes the truth of what is to be proven. So instead of arguing to the truth, you kind of just presuppose it. Here's an example. In David Hasselhoff's biography, Hasselhoff claims to be an honest man. The claim is true since Hasselhoff wouldn't lie, so Hasselhoff is an honest man. This is begging the question. You're assuming that Hasselhoff is an honest man instead of proving that he's an honest man. So this is an unconvincing argument. It fails to convince. It begs the question. Is he an honest man? I don't know. That is all. That was a lot of content. Go over the slides. That'll help you reabsorb and relearn this stuff. Just more exposure you get to this, the better. May the force be with you.